Part 6 of the Dragon's Scourge by M.R.R. Lopez. Grilla nodded. I pray you'll find what you seek. May it be all you hope for. After the solemn blessing, the Orcs moved on, leaving the fairy encampment nearly as quickly as they had come. Most people having standing bias against orcs as a whole, which they acquired from reading stories about the often vilified race. Despite all their boasting about being bloodthirsty savages, orcs really had a sense of honor, or at least that's what they claimed. Orcs did not usually attack without a reason, and they were actually very bureaucratic in the way they went about their business, such as charging outrageous fees to people traveling through their land. The Clove let out a heavy sigh as he turned to scan the wreckage the orcs had left behind. Fatalities were minimal, since everyone either fled in terror or still lay stoned out of their minds, as the horde had run through, ransacking their tents. Now that the danger had passed, life was slowly returning back to the tent city. Suddenly, someone came up behind the Clove, and he quickly spun around, ready to fight. "You saved us!" Anastasia exclaimed in a musical voice, as she hovered in the air and clung to the Clove's neck. "Get off!" he growled. Anastasia frowned and looked over him. "Don't you remember me?" she asked. "Yes, I remember you," the Clove snarled. "You stole my memories, you rotten, oversized pixie." Anastasia's jet-black eyes narrowed as she gasped, as if shocked by the accusation. "I didn't. Who told you these lies?" The Clove clenched his teeth. "Then who did?" he demanded. "And how do I get him back?" The fairy shook her head as tears rolled down her face. We found you. We saved you. We took you in. Don't you remember?" She shot back at him bitterly. Without warning, the Clove seized Anastasia by her frail wrists and twisted, threatening to break it. "Then why don't I remember this? Tell me, or so help me, I will burn this place to the ground and rip off your wings. The orcs will be nothing compared to me," he seethed. Tears flooded down Anastasia's face. "Stop!" she cried in pain. "You had a horrible head injury. That's why you can't remember." The Clove ignored her pleas and did not loosen his grip. "Do you think I'm a fool?" he growled. "How could it heal so quickly?" He gave the fairy a sharp jerk. Anastasia's black eyes gazed back at him without fear. "Like this," she said, as she touched his face with her free hand. He winced as she brushed the bruises on his face. He had received a black eye in the fight, but in seconds the pain and swelling vanished. The Clove loosened his grip and stared at the fairy in dismay. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" Anastasia asked as she traced her healing fingers over his minor scratches and abrasions. She moved her hand down to his chest and sighed. The Clove grunted once more as he felt sharp pain from his rib cage, and she healed it with only a touch of her hand. "The orcs are evil liars," she whispered. "We would never hurt you." The Clove stared at her in bafflement. "How did you do that?" he gasped. But then Anastasia leaned over and kissed him on the lips. The Clove blinked, felt a wave of white light rush over his body, and for a moment he felt as if he would black out. The fire in his eyes dissipated, and he let go of Anastasia's wrist. "What happened?" he asked. "What? You kissed me, didn't you? Didn't you? What happened?" Anastasia smiled coldly. "You saved us from the orcs?" The glow blinked. "I did?" The fairy smirked. "Don't you remember anything?" she asked. He frowned and slowly shook his head. A troubled expression came over his face. "No," he replied distantly. "You are badly hurt. When we found you, I healed you. You could have died," she explained. "Ah, there's our hero!" exclaimed a loud booming voice behind him. The Clove turned to see the fat man in the red topcoat and razor-thin mustache. For some reason, he looked familiar, but he couldn't place the face. The Clove held out his hand in friendship. Before returning the handshake, the jolly fat man reached up and then pulled the flesh off his face. The Clove jumped in horror as he watched the male fairy emerge from the ringmaster's flesh suit. "I'm Gilly," the fairy declared, extending his hand. The fairy's blonde hair was so long and his features were so fair that the Clove thought he could have passed as a woman, if not for his voice. Not wishing to be rude, the Clove grunted and gave Gilly's hand a firm shake, and quickly let go. The fairy's hand had been uncomfortably soft and slimy. He quickly dusted his calloused fingers on the fabric of his pant leg, grimacing as he watched Gilly pull out a small bottle of white buttery goo and dabbed a large glob into his hands. "I have never seen anyone throw a blade like that before. It was quite exciting," Gilly praised. The Clove skeptically tilted his head back, but said nothing. Gilly went on. "We certainly could use your skills. But they may be primitive. It will put on a good show." "Primitive?" the Clove repeated. He was a bit lost in the context of the word and what they meant by his skills. He glanced at the blood on his hands and asked, "Do you mean as a mercenary?" Gilly looked at his Anastasia and laughed. "No, no," he chuckled, shaking his head. "In our circus, we want you to join us and be part of our show." The Clove smiled and then glanced down at the skin suit lying at Gilly's feet. "Oh," he said. Gilly bent down and picked the deflated flesh suit. The scalp drifted eerily in the wind like a canvas with no backing. "We all have costumes like this. I'm sure we could make you one as well," Gilly offered as he held out the jolly fat man's flabby form for the Clove to inspect. The Clove tilted his chin back, a bit unnerved to have the shriveled husk staring at him. He grunted, not sure what to make of it, but he was more concerned about his loss of self. "How did I get here?" he asked, looking around. The fairies glanced at one another, and then Anastasia said, "I already told you. The orcs attacked, and you drove them out, saving us. We found you near death. Surely you must remember a little." A troubled frown creased his face as he tried to recall these events, and then his head began to ache. The Clove's hand instantly reached for something. It wasn't there. Something was missing. He stared at the empty sheath and felt sick to his stomach. "My sword," he breathed. Sweat began to form on his forehead. But it wasn't just a sword. He knew that much. There was something special about it, but I wasn't sure what it was. Yuli stepped in. "You're not looking well. Anastasia will take you to your tent. You should eat something." The closed, yellow eyes scanned the surroundings. He had to find his sword. Where was it? Anastasia smiled as she took her elbow. "Is something the matter? Do you remember something?" she queried. "My sword. I have to find it." His breathing was a little more ragged now. Anastasia frowned and led him to the small tent. She felt his forehead and frowned again. "You should eat," she declared, but Clo shook his head and went over to the tent post to support himself. "I'm not hungry. I need to find it," he insisted feverishly. Anastasia brought him a bronze cup, but the Clove turned away from her and wrapped his aching head inside the crook of his elbow, trying hard to focus. "Find what?" "The sword. My sword. I need to find it." The fairy shook her head. "The Orcs must have taken it. It is long lost now." "Please drink this," she declared, attempting to press the cup to his lips. The Clove pushed it away, and his face hardened. "Then I must go after them," he said firmly. Anastasia stepped in his way. "Wait. We have your sword." The Clove blinked and then frowned. "Where?" he demanded. Anastasia bent down and picked up one of the stones that had been stacked around the tent stakes. "This is your sword," she declared. The Clove frowned, but as he stepped forward to challenge her, he was blinded by a bright flash of light. The Clove put his hands to shield his eyes, and as the light dissipated, he stood back and marveled, for there was not a stone in her hands, but a gleaming blade with a golden hilt. The sword was adorned with gold and studded gleaming rubies. "You are indeed a great warrior to carry such a sword," she marveled. The Clove swallowed hard. The sword was truly magnificent. There was only one problem. "This isn't mine," he stated. Anastasia's smile faded slightly. "Surely it is. Don't you remember?" The Clove glanced down at the empty leather sheath at his side. "That sword is," he paused, "too beautiful for a rugged sheath like this. And the blade is straight. Mine was curved like a cutlass." He tried to push past her. He tried to push past the fairy, but she pressed the sword into his chest. "Even so, you saved us. Here, take it as a gift. It is yours now." The Clove stared at her, and then back. "The sword. It is too much. Why did you keep it as a stone?" he asked. "You cannot refuse such a gift. It would be an insult. We kept it as a stone because it was safer. But in your hands, the sword can protect us." Anastasia smiled kindly toward him. The Clove looked down at the gleaming blade and gently took it from Anastasia's hands. "It's so light," he gasped. His hands tingled as his fingers wrapped around the hilt. It felt foreign and off balance. The sword's magic aura made his stomach churn. This is... The Clove paused, looking for the right words to say. "Put the sword away. Stay. Rest," Anastasia said with a sweep of her hand. Leclos stumbled for words. He wasn't sure how to tell her that it was too much. You do not need to speak, Anastasia comforted him as she held the cup out to him once more. Leclos did his best to smile, and even though he was not thirsty, he took the cup and drank. The water was sweet, but as he drank more deeply, it grew bitter, and a sharp pain pierced his skull. The cup slid from his fingers as he fell backward. He felt as if his entire world was engulfed by a horrible, blinding white light. But suddenly it was gone, and he found himself gasping for air. He looked around in bewilderment. He remembered nothing. He didn't even know how he had gotten where he was. It's all right, he heard a soft, reassuring voice say. Leclos instantly reached for his sword, but as soon as he saw the marvelous blade, he dropped it in terror. It looked and felt so alien. What is going on? You hit your head, the voice said soothingly. Be still. Rest. Leclos stared at the woman who had spoken and slowly sat down on the small bed. Yes, I should rest, he agreed as he settled down. Just then, the woman stiffened, and her dark eyes narrowed into angry slits. Leclos frowned and turned to see the shadowy outline of a cat creeping outside the tent. Something was clearly wrong. The air grew tense. Leclos' hand went to his sword hilt. What is it? He asked in a low voice. Anastasia clenched her teeth, and the air grew heavy as she summoned her magic. The cat. Leclos blinked and looked at Anastasia. The cat, he scoffed. He could not believe that this small creature was causing all the unrest. But as the words left his mouth, there was an intense flash of white light. Leclos drew the sword, but out of the blinding white light where the cat had once been came a scrawny girl wielding a knife. Kill it! Anastasia shrieked. Seeing that it was just a girl and no more than 12 years, Leclos tried to use the flat edge of his sword to knock the knife from the girl's hand. Steel clattered with steel, but to his horror, it was his blade that broke in the clash. It snapped as if it made out of straw. Leclos cursed, but he had little time to recover, for the girl slashed wildly at him, intent on running him through. There was no room to retreat in the small tent, so Leclos stepped forward and caught her by the wrist. I'll kill you, she snarled. Not with this, Leclos declared, and snatched the knife from her hand. Kill it! Anastasia shrieked again. Leclos rolled his eyes. I don't kill kids. He growled impatiently as he tried to keep the girl from clawing his eyes out. What did you do with her? The girl demanded. Where is she? I'll kill you! I swear I will! Leclos frowned. It was obvious he was upset about something, but he could not remember ever seeing her before. Who are you? What are you talking about? Why are you doing this? He demanded. My name is Kira, and I'm going to kill you, she vowed. Where is Ethra? She demanded as she beat upon him as hard as she could with her closed fists. Leclos felt an icy fear and gripped the girl by the shoulders and held her still. Kira, I don't know you, he insisted. I don't remember who I am or what I have done. Who is Ethra, and why are you looking for her? Kira became still and glared at the Clove hatefully. "You fool! You're eating their food and drank their wine. That's why you've forgotten. Damn you! Damn you all! She did not do anything to you." Clove noticed that the fairies had gathered outside the entrance of the tent. The air was thick and charged with magic. "Have no fear. She's a liar. Stand aside, friend. She is not what she seems." "They'll kill her because of you," Kita snarled. They skin us alive and wear our hides like party costumes." She made a quick grab for the knife, but the Clove held her back. He glanced down at the broken sword on the ground and then noticed the cutlass tucked in Gilly's red sash. He didn't know who or what he was, but he knew that was his sword. "I see you have found my sword, friend," the Clove declared, forcing himself to smile. Gilly stiffened and then smiled back. "I'm glad to see you recovering so quickly," he chuckled as he pulled the cutlass from the sash. "Here it is, friend." He held the hilt toward him. The Clove quickly pushed the girl aside and reached for the sword, but Gilly's black eyes flashed with suspicion and pulled the sword back before the Clove could grasp the hilt. "Since you're feeling so well, how about you tell us who you are?" he demanded. Seeing the tension escalating, Kita paused for a moment and watched the young warrior intently to see how he would respond. The Clove clenched his teeth and growled, "I was hoping you would tell me." Anastasia quickly stepped in and raised her hands in a peaceful gesture. "We're your friends. We would never hurt you. This shifter is trying to deceive you, just like the Orcs did. Don't you see?" The Clove's yellow eyes blazed with anger. "You tried to replace my sword with a fake. If you are my friends, you will return what is mine." Anastasia glanced over to Gilly, who nodded. "Very well," Gillian agreed. "In an act of good faith, here's your sword." The fairy slipped the black blade around, holding the hilt out for Clove to reclaim it. But the moment he clasped the hilt, Gilly's pale lips twisted into a cruel grin. "Steel twixt and twain, soul and blood, until you remember who you are, this blade will not be for your hand to wield." He spoke in a rhyming sing-song voice, casting the spell over the Clove and the sword. The Clove's face paled immediately. As the last words of the fairy's curse came out, the cutlass grew heavy, and the tip fell to the dirt floor. Despite all his strength and anger, an invisible force dragged the blade down to the ground. "What magic is this?" he snarled in rage. "If you defy us, you'll never regain your memories or wield your sword again," he declared smugly. The Clove's hand tightened around the sword, and he grinned wickedly as he raised the blade. But the moment he went to hack Gilly to pieces, just like the first time, the sword grew heavy. Every time he attempted to cut down the fairy, the tip plunged into the earth. "You pigs!" Akita shouted. "Where is Ethra? Where have you taken the unicorn?" Gilly laughed as he pulled a long silver dagger from his belt. "The unicorn is not your concern," he said menacingly. "You should be more worried about what is going to happen to you, shifter." The remark only served to solidify the girl's story. So far as he could tell, she had been the only one telling him the truth, and the others he knew he could not trust. If it was true, it meant the fairies had indeed stolen his thoughts, stolen his memories, stolen who he was. Worry about yourself, Leclos snarled as he thrust Kita's knife at Gilly. The fairy tried to counter, but Leclos stepped closer and sliced the knife down, cleaving the fairy's hand clean off the wrist. Gilly shrieked in agony while the rest of the fairies began to shout. The Clove assumed that they would begin to attack them, but instead they all leapt upon their leader, and in a grotesque blood frenzy they began ripping him limb from limb. Although he was unable to wield the cursed blade in battle, the Clove was not going to leave the only thing that connected him to this past behind, so he quickly sheathed the sword and strapped it over his shoulder and looked for a way out. Seeing that the door was blocked, the Clove slashed a large slit into the canvas with a knife and looked over at Kita. "This way!" he called out to her as he ran toward the trees, but when he looked back, he saw Kita lingering outside the tent. "What are you doing?" he cried. "We have to get out of here." "I have to find Ethra. She is here somewhere," Kita insisted. The Clove cursed. The bloody shouts from the tent were getting louder. "Did you see what just happened? They're insane!" "I know, but she's my friend. You can run if you like, but she is the only one that can help you now." The Clove dug his heels into the ground and turned. The air was thick and charged with magic, and the fairies were now chanting and beating on their drums. "Damn it, we better be fast. They're going to be looking for us soon." However, to Clove's amazement, Kita stopped and began picking through the garments on the clothesline. The Clove cursed under his breath. "Listen, we have batshit crazy cannibal fairies after us. We don't have time for clothes." Kita turned. "Put this on, and if you want to live, shut up," she instructed. The Clove angrily turned around, only to catch the wet cloak in the face. "What the—" "I am twice your age, girl, and if you haven't forgotten, I'm the reason why we're still alive." "Fool, I'm 300 years old, and you're the reason we're in this damned mess," Kita shot back, and without another word, she slipped on the cloak and vanished into thin air. The Clove's eyes widened in shock, and then he glanced at the cloak in his hands. The magic in the soft silk garment made his arms and fingers tingle and itch. Cursing under his breath, he quickly slipped it on and rushed forward, trying to find Kita, only to crash into some sort of barrier. "What the— Watch where you're going!" Kita hissed. The Clove chuckled. "You're invisible," he remarked, stating out the obvious a little too loudly. "Not completely," she scolded. "Our shadows still can be seen. And watch where you step. And keep quiet. Don't do anything stupid." The Clove looked down once more. Sure enough, he saw their shadows on the ground. "Why is this cloak so itchy?" he complained. Kita put her palm to her head in exasperation. "They can still hear you," she hissed. "Now shut up before you get us both skinned alive." The Clove clenched his teeth. He was developing a strong dislike for the mouthy shifter. However, at the moment, he didn't know how long he could last in the cloak. It was unbearably hot, and he felt like it was made out of lead. The longer he wore it, the more nauseous he felt. The fairies were swarming about, shrieking and wailing insanely at the top of their lungs as they ruthlessly attacked one another. It was utter chaos. "What are they doing?" the Clove whispered. "Do you expect me to know everything?" Kita growled in annoyance. "We have to find Ethra before they tear her apart." Kita peered around the corner of the tent. "Are all fairies this way?" he queried. Kita rolled her eyes. Of course not. Where have you been in your entire life? These heathen fae are wandering outcasts. The clove frowned and looked down, very much troubled. How did they become like this? Kita stiffened and then turned around. You don't know? She replied. The clove clenched his teeth, angry at first, but then he felt a sharp pain run down his left arm, and he turned to look. What at first appeared to be an empty field now showed a great white ring of fire. There, he gasped, pointing to the open field. I don't see anything, Kita hissed. There's nothing there. I would have sensed her presence by now. The clove shook his head and said, I see it. I can feel the heat. It's in there. Unable to stand the cloak any longer, he threw it to the ground. Follow me, he instructed as he sprinted towards the wall of elemental flames. It was not like normal fire. The earth was not scorched. As far as he knew, they should just be able to pass right on through. But the clove was horribly wrong. Time seemed to stop, and he shrieked and writhed, lost in the inferno of elemental flame. All as he could hear was the fire rage around him. Just when he thought he was going to die, there was a great roar like the sound of thunder. The earth heaved and cracked about him as he stumbled forward. And then finally, as he regained his footing, he suddenly found himself inside the broken ring of elemental flame that blazed around the circle he had passed through. Before him were cages filled with all manner of strange creatures, some barely alive. It was then he heard a voice, not with his ears, but it echoed inside his head. Impressive. That would have killed most men. The clove gasped and looked around in bewilderment, only to see the unicorn tethered by two cords to a stake. The once proud unicorn's head was bent, and thousands of lacerations from razor-sharp knives covered her entire body. Clove's heart was pricked, knowing that this had been his doing. They stole my memories, he said. I have wronged you, but I'm here to make it right. Can you help me? The unicorn did not lift her head or moved her mouth to speak. Should I help you? I am here because of you, replied the voice inside his head. How can I help you if I can't even remember who I am? He snapped impatiently at her. Very well. Unbind my head, and I'll show you what you are, she said out loud. Without hesitation, the clove cut the cords, but the moment the unicorn's head was free, she turned on him, slashing at him with her horn. A sharp pain shot across his shoulder. The clove gasped in anguish and dove away before she could tear out his insides. Fortunately, Kita jumped between them before the unicorn could trample the clove into the dust with her sharp hooves. Ethra, he's here to help us, she explained. They've tricked him as well. Help from a pyro, she snorted in disgust. The clove stared down in bewilderment as he watched his own blood steam and hiss as it fell to the earth. Kita looked at him and stepped away in shock. He glanced around and saw many more creatures bound, chained, and imprisoned inside the cages. Birds of fire, griffins, and so many others. Gripped by the horror of what he saw, the clove forgot about the gaping gash on his shoulder. Could I have done all of this? He asked. No, how could I? Why? Who am I? He quickly hardened himself and began cutting the creatures free and breaking the locks off the cages, knowing full well what grim fate was in store for them if they stayed. All the magical beasts fled, taking to the land or sky, save for one. The Clove halted when he saw a wagon filled with murky water. Inside the wagon was a creature, part human, part fish. The mermaid could not run. She could not fly. She had nowhere to go. In desperation, the Clove turned and saw the unicorn, who was watching him. "I need you to pull the cart," he declared. "I am no cart horse, dragon spawn," Ethra snapped at him angrily. "Besides, there is no time. You would do best to run like the others." The Clove's yellow eyes blazed with anger. "Then run, coward," he snapped back at her. Ethra held her head up high and snorted, "I run from no one." A sudden rush of wind came churning up around them, raising a great circle of dust. The Clove's eyes widened in dismay. He turned toward the unicorn and saw that the tip of her horn was shining like a star. Ethra dipped her head and pressed into what seemed like an invisible barrier. The Clove marveled to see her carve her horn into the very fabric of the third dimension. Inside, there was absolute, utter, and total darkness. Without so much as a word of explanation, both the unicorn and Kita passed through the barrier and disappeared into the jagged black sea of emptiness. The Clove wasn't sure where they were going, but he wasn't about to stay and wait for the fairies. Summoning all his strength, his legs burned as he strained to push the wagon through the black void. Whatever was on the other side, or inside, was better than staying here. Chapter 5. By the Sword. You have been listening to The Dragon Scourge by M.R.R. Lopez. If you want to hear more, like and subscribe. The story continues.